Wow,
Yeah.
that was wonderful. Hello, Joseph.
So good to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you. Could you tell me, your journey to becoming the artist that you are today, to becoming this musical artist who has played on so many albums? You began when you were small, when you were
Yeah.
young,
hmm
but the journey has by no means been a linear process because you had a significant challenge that has come up during that, and I want you to talk about that first.
Yeah. Thank you. That's right. I began playing violin when I was just 5 years old, and right from the beginning, I loved it. I loved the creativity. I loved just being able to become good at something, and I loved sharing my music. Even when the plumber would come over to the house, I would, play, whip out my violin and play whatever pieces I was doing. And I performed all the time. I loved it, and so I decided to get actual training. Go to music school. At the college level, I thought that I would just get to enhance my gifts and be able to do the same kind of joyful things, just playing from my heart that I did when I was
Mhm.
little. But when I got to music school, what happened for me was that it was actually pretty stressful, very competitive environment, and we were encouraged to practice as much as possible. And what happened for me was that in my second year, I started to get pain in both my arms, like right here in
Ooh,
the forearms, and
ouch.
yeah, and I had no tools to help myself with that. And when I went to go talk to my violin teacher about it, he said, you should learn how to relax.
Oh, that's nice. Yes, I love that. When I was growing up, I would hear things, people would tell me, I'm nervous around girls, right?
Mm,
They say, well, just be yourself.
exactly.
What the hell does that mean? What?
Yeah. Well, and in a sense, it's true. But if you don't have skills around that, if you don't have tools around that,
Exactly.
then it's
How?
useless. And so started to see doctors and massage therapists, and I did uh, physical therapy and chiropractic, and I saw a neurologist. I saw a doctor who only sees musicians. I did shiatsu, and I wore like a tennis elbow brace. I took over the counter pain medications. Over a year later, I could barely play violin. My music career seemed to be like, stopping before it even began, and I really didn't have any answers. Everything that I tried was just piecemeal. The doctor would say, "Oh, it hurts there, so let's focus there," or whatever it is, and it would bring partial help. But whenever I'd go back to playing violin, I'd just be in pain again. And and then finally, I found this class on Alexander technique, which is something I'd never heard of. And I thought, well, I tried everything else. I might as well try this. And it absolutely blew me away. For the first time, I for the first time I realized that I had a body. The teacher was the Alexander technique teacher was teaching this class. She was encouraging us to notice our body while we were doing different activities, including playing music, but really anything. And this was the first time that anybody had ever suggested this to me. And what I noticed was that I was really tight all the time, which is kind of I guess my violin teacher had noticed that, but I hadn't noticed. I was so used to being tight, so used to being overly effortful in how I played violin and did lots of other things that I didn't notice it anymore, except the pain. But I didn't notice like, the root cause of the pain, which was how I was using my body. And so through the Alexander technique, I had all these experiences of using my body effortlessly. This was a revelation.
Wow.
With time, my pain went away because I was no longer playing violin in this sort of cramped, tense, effortful way. I was much more fluid, much more effortless. My technique became just like effortless. So it was so much easier to do all these things that I needed to do with playing violin, and then my sound quality got a whole lot better. With music, all musical instruments are meant to resonate, right? And so the violin is like a wooden bell. And if you're really squeezing the violin, if you're really squeezing the bow, then that dampens all the vibrations. And what we want for a bell is like for it to be able to ring as much as possible, right? And so by easing up on the tension, my violin was ringing so much more. My sound was so much more open, and and it got even deeper than that. I remember one time in one of my Alexander technique classes, my teacher was helping me release tension while I was playing violin, and she said afterwards, she could feel my body shift, my body let go all of a sudden in the middle of playing, and she said, like after that, you sounded like Yehudi Menuhin, who was the great
Oh,
violinist of the 20th century, and I don't know if
goodness
that's really true,
gracious.
but there was something different about the expressive quality. And I noticed this countless times when I learned to become an Alexander Technique teacher, and later on, uh, uh, when teaching other artists who came to see me because they were their own tension issues. And I even teach this to my young violin students. I'll teach basic effortlessness skills, the effortlessness skills that I wish I had had that could have prevented all my issues. I teach this now to all my students, and the difference in their sound quality, their comfort with playing violin, their musicality is just it's like spine tingling.
Wow. So
Yeah.
this is an energy technique. I mean, this is energy work, right? I mean, we're talking about the flow, the
Mm.
constriction, and the allowing of flow. Do I understand that correctly? I mean, did Alexander come to this through both a physical and a metaphysical place, or who is this Alexander?
Yeah, Alexander was an Australian actor who was born in the late 1800s, who kept on losing his voice, and he had a very similar story to what I went through. He was, wanted to be able to share his, his acting, his Shakespeare. He loved doing that, and he kept on losing his voice, even up on stage. He would do vocal rest. He would have like steam baths with, essential oils, to help relax his vocal
Exactly.
cords. He did vocal exercises. None of it helped, and so he reasoned that it must be something he was doing to himself, and so he ended up. It's hard to imagine doing this, but he spent years watching himself speak in front of a mirror, just seeing, like looking at the subtle body movements that were happening while he was speaking. And finally, he noticed, like every time he was doing his recitations in front of the mirror, he would clench his neck and his jaw. And of course, if you're clenching your neck and your jaw, you're not going to like, vocalize very well.
No.
It's going to put all kinds of strain on your vocal apparatus. And then you're going to have to like work even harder to move past that strain. So this is the source of his vocal troubles. And I suppose there is an energetic component, but Alexander was very focused on body movement,
Hmm.
and yeah, and yeah. So that's the main focus, like learning how to use your body more easily, especially in the most difficult moments.
How wonderful. All right. So now, now let's fast forward to here you are, you're teaching, and now you're getting a chance to share this with the world.
Yeah,
Because this is what, and in addition to playing on all these albums and being a studio magician, it's which it is to me, total magic.
yeah,
A studio musician, and being able to share this, you're now both teaching and you're sharing this in the world
yeah.
through your book that you have designed, which is
Yes,
Soul Force.
that's right.
So now tell me how this came about, and let's lay the groundwork for our viewers and listeners about Soul Force.
Yeah. So that special creative energy that I saw, that I experienced in myself, and I experienced in my students, my Alexander Technique colleagues who are also artists. This quality that would just come through, just kind of all by itself as soon as you got out of the way of yourself. Like, that I didn't have a name for it at the time, but it really caught my attention and became the basis for this book. It's what I call Soul Force. The book is called Soulforce: How to Discover Your Artistic Purpose, Create More Freely, and Make Art That Matters.
Mhm.
And so this book is founded in great deal on my experiences being in pain, and then coming through the Alexander technique, learning freedom and experiencing soul force. But it also has a larger vision.
Yes.
And yeah, so a couple of years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, and this is how I first learned about the term soul force. I was listening to this one podcast where the guest was asked, with all of the political strife and ecological damage and the pandemics and all kinds of existential crises, what chance does humanity have of surviving the next couple decades?
Well, there's a reasonable question. All right, let's get right to it.
And the guest, who's an author I really admire, Jamie Wheel, he said, to me, it's either soul force or bust. And in that moment, even though I'd never heard that term before, I thought, wow, that makes so much sense. What if I could have, because I connected it to this quality that I'd seen coming through my students, and what soul force really is to me, and what I could sort of intuit at that time, even though I had just heard this word. It's the transformative creative energy that comes from facing your challenges when you'd normally clamp down and tighten, force, fight against. When you'd normally do that, you instead choose to face that same challenge from a place of ease, wholeness, aliveness, connection, right? And then magic can happen. Now that's a leap of faith. And this is the same leap of faith that Gandhi took, because this is where that term came from. Satyagraha. That was Gandhi's term. And, we're so, in our society, what's a Western society, we're so used to force and control. This is the way our technology works. This is the way our medicine works. This is the way our government works. This is our way our relationships work. It's so deeply baked in, and it can work in the short term,
Yes, exactly.
and it
In
can
the
be very
zero
powerful.
sum in the zero
Yes,
sum world
yeah,
where there's only enough to go around, we
yes,
can certainly make it. But in the world we need to get to, this
that's right.
world to survive, the
Yes,
world of synergy and the
yes,
world that will not work. It
correct.
stops working at that level, almost like when you get from the quantum level into the
Yeah,
material. It just stops working.
yes, yeah. It's rather myopic, and so I saw this connection then between what Gandhi was able to achieve, because it worked, right? We normally we so expect that force and control is the only way to do things, but Gandhi knew that fighting against the British Raj just wasn't going to work, because the British Raj had more military power. So what he needed was a different mode of being, a different mode of inviting change, creating change, and his mode of doing that was soul force, which also translates to love and insistence, or firmness in the pursuit of truth. So he spoke his truth, which happened to resonate with other Indians at the time, that India should rule itself. And the way he did that, upholding that truth in the face of so much resistance and hatred and violence, was so inspiring. And that's why it worked. Inspiration can seem like weak sauce in the story of scientific materialism. Like, what is that? Come on, let's get down to hard facts. But inspiration moves souls. And
Exactly. Look at the Colorado River that
mm,
created the Grand Canyon
yeah,
from water.
yeah, yeah. Speaking of which,
So we hydrate. And so Joseph, you what I so we can use this certainly as musicians and all, but this is, if it works there, it has
yes,
to work everywhere.
absolutely,
Talk more
absolutely.
about
Yeah, the principle of soul force is a life principle, and what I've done is simply bring that into practical terms for artists. And my because these are my people, right? I know this world very deeply. I know the challenges and joys of being an artist, being a creative, and so I've written this book to help my group, my people. But really, I mean, this can apply to anybody, and this message in this time of like polarization and strife and this increasing chaos, uh, like the meaninglessness crisis that's just overwhelming so many people.
There's no question we can
Yeah.
we can't do that. But if we go to the subsuit, I in my perspective, humanity, each human being is an artist
Mm.
that goes through its own way as it's making our way through, and the choices we make and all. But there is the subset who have volitionally said, okay, I'm going to be an artist and we're going to
Yes.
do that. And so across that spectrum, we have to deal from inspiration all the way out through execution and all that.
Mm,
And that's what
absolutely.
Soulforce
That's right.
addresses.
That's right. That's right. Because even though the arts are, we all know that sort of in our hearts that the arts are supposed to be joyful and inspiring, even if you're playing a requiem, right? It's meant to have this uplifting, enlivening effect, and yet the way that we're taught to create, especially at the highest levels and conservatories, the way that things are set up for us to make a living as artists, the way that we teach and create, it's that sort of force and control mindset that I was talking about earlier has infiltrated all of these areas. And if you're a creative, you've experienced this. Maybe you haven't known what it was about. Maybe you thought it was something wrong with you, but it's not. There's nothing wrong with you. If you've experienced like performance anxiety and creative blocks and self doubt, difficulty making a living, injuries like what I had, burnout, or the fear that your art doesn't really matter in today's world.
Yes.
All of these are the result of creating within the story of force and control. I call it the story of separation in my book. And they're just the natural result of inhabiting that worldview. Now, thankfully, that's not the only worldview we can inhabit. That's not the end of the story. Because if it were, that'd be a very sad place.
Wouldn't it? We'd be
Mhm.
cast out of the garden. We'd
Yes.
just be, we'd have that sense of separation and that there would never be this one ment. I love the phrase atonement because you can
Yes.
break it down into at one ment, which is just
Yes.
merely returning to the place where we are, where we're one.
Absolutely. And that to me is one of the core vital functions of the arts. I'll say
To
this.
remind
Yeah.
us, with bringing
Yes.
us back
Exactly.
to mind.
Exactly. Right. Because I think we've forgotten. It's like as a society on the whole, we've forgotten what life is about. And arts are a microcosm of our society. We've forgotten what the arts are about. And one of the big reasons I wrote this book is to help remind us.
Yes.
Because like I mentioned just a minute ago, a lot of artists have this secret fear that our art doesn't really matter in today's world. And we get this message in countless ways. You know, sort of a classic example is that the arts are always the first thing to be cut from schools.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking about how you wanted to go to music school, the it went in there. Oh well, what did the parental units say about I'm going to music school? So I mean, so that's it's like automatic in our own
Yes.
in our own limitation brains. This reptilian.
Yeah. Well, it comes from the desire to survive. Why did my parents say, Joe, you'd be a good engineer? You have the mind of an engineer. How
Exactly.
about you think about engineering? Right? Why did I receive that message so many times? Because my parents wanted me to survive
Of course.
comfortably, right? And so, of course, that makes sense. But there's this dichotomy or seeming dichotomy between survival and love.
Mhm.
And so many of the things, like going back to that myopic focus, our society is so focused on the mechanics of survival, the materiality of survival. And of course, that's important, but it's not the whole picture. Survival without love is meaningless.
Yes.
Why would you want to live a life like that? And this is why so many people are killing themselves through the diseases of despair. Because we're so focused on the mechanics of survival. That's our only definition that's allowed, unless you want to be cast out as like a religious nut or something like that.
Sure.
And but you know we have to remember that love and survival are so intertwined.
I don't see anything that I have read in your book or anything that could possibly be antithetical to any religion.
Mm,
So I see it as that you can just go across that, even though what it as its core, there is a spiritual
mm,
principles
yeah,
of what you're doing in the sense that we are, in my metaphor, we're spiritual beings having a human journey.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we're having this particular path.
yeah, yeah. To me, so many of the sort of core issues that we face come from this fundamental split between matter and spirit.
Hmm.
Um, in sort of conventional religious terms, the ultimate reality is spirit, and matter can be sort of disregarded as base, profane. And during after the scientific revolution, and what part of what that philosophy of scientific materialism was, oh, like if God exists, then you can't find it in material reality. We look from the atoms to galaxies. There's no God there. So the only thing that must exist is just dead matter. And
Exactly.
life itself then is just some sort of fluke.
Hmm.
And this is a very depressing worldview. Actually, both of them are. They both have issues because they both cut off half of reality.
Yes.
And to me, art at its best shows us, gives us an embodied experience. It's not just an intellectual thing, it's an embodied experience, a felt experience of matter and spirit in the matter. And this is what we call holy. It's a holy experience, being fully engrossed in the moment, being taken sort of outside of your individual self, your egoic concerns, and seeing that you already are connected to something larger than yourself. This is what art is meant to do. And we need artists to remember that this is what art is meant to do, so that we can, as artists, play our role in society, play our proper role in society, which is to help others remember this as well through our creations.
That's beautiful. I love. So where are you going with Soulforce? Are you going to be teaching this in workshops? Are you going to be teaching this? And what is your, as you look at this, okay, here you have your book and you're in your hand, and here it is in October of 2024, and scene.
Next step, world domination.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'm starting the Soulforce Arts Institute, which will provide thought leadership and training like workshops and online programs, in-person programs to help artists address their creative challenges, whatever those might be, by reconnecting with their soul force. So this is what I'm doing now.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to be able to meet with you today. My only ask is that we continue
Hmm,
to have another conversation
absolutely.
as we're going along, as you're learning along this path, as you continue to
Mm,
learn and grow,
yeah.
and I continue to do the same and be able to connect with you as to what you're doing and support you, because every single thing that you've said, Joseph, every single thing that you have done resonates with me so deeply.
Mm, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. Well, let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you, Joseph. And we will put the links, of course, to Soulforce. We will be able to have this. We'll be able to have this beautiful book cover, and be able to put the links to you and
Mhm.
to everything that you're doing, and how people can connect with it, and also how they can connect with you through your website.
Great.
Wonderful. Anything else? Anything that we haven't talked about that you would?
Hmm. Yeah. One of the big themes in my book is about mastery. What does artistic mastery mean?
Mhm.
What does it mean to create a masterpiece? And I liked a very expansive definition of mastery. Um, Sort of the conventional definition that I encountered in music school is that mastery is about technical proficiency. And it's true that that's part of it, but that's not the whole picture. There are actually two other aspects to mastery. One is effortlessness. Well, you heard earlier about the gifts that effortlessness can bring to your creative life. The third thing is the knowledge of the soul. And nobody talked about this when I was learning learning the violin. But this is the deeper why, the thing that you have inside you that motivates your creative life. And so my encouragement to the creative within all of us is to find a more comprehensive vision for what mastery can be. This could be mastering a particular craft, like violin or painting or whatever, or it could be thinking of your whole life as a masterpiece. And to include the mechanics, yes, the technique, but also the effortlessness and also the knowledge of the soul, letting that all, because they're all intertwined. And when you have all three elements together, that's what leads to soul force. And that's what creates masterpieces. That's what true artistic mastery is really about.